With the bench top upside down on a table, I'm going to start mounting the end vise on the bench top by first removing the nuts that hold the end assembly to the guide rods. I'm going to go ahead and slip that out and set it aside. And now I'm going to slide the guide rod assembly out of the base of the end vise, set it aside as well. I'm temporarily going to install the wide end cap onto the bench top. Of course, I'm not gluing it at this point. I'm just putting it in place and then securing it with a couple of long bar clamps. This is just to make sure that it's in the exact position it'll be in once it is installed, glued in place later on. Once the clamps are in place, I'm going to go ahead and slide the vice's base against the inside of the end cap and use a rule to center the base on the underside of the bench top. Now I'm going to use a cool little tool I made from a length of 1-inch dowel with a dowel centering point. I'm going to use this to transfer the exact position of both the guide rod holes and the vice screw hole onto the inside of the end cap. So I just slide it in place and give it a couple of taps, and then repeat the process on the two guide rod holes. Once the three center points are marked, I remove the clamps and the end cap, and now I'm going to go ahead and put the end cap onto the matching other vise face, and I align them very carefully so they line up together, because we're going to go ahead and drill holes for the guide rods and vice screw all at once through both. I'm just going to use a couple of short clamps to hold the two vise faces together. Now here at the drill press, I'm going to use a 1 1/8 inch diameter Forstner bit, which I'll center using the marks we made earlier. And I'm going to drill through both members at the same time. Of course, to assure accuracy and to keep things from shifting, I'm going to go ahead and clamp both to the drill press table before I bore the holes. Here's the third hole for the other guide rod being bored. Now then, I switch over to a 3/4 inch Forstner bit, and I'm going to go ahead and drill out the 3 holes in each vise face for the bench dogs that will be used with the vise for holding things to the bench top. And once all these holes are drilled, I'm back at the bench, and I'm going to go ahead and once again temporarily mount the end cap or inner vise face using the spline. Now normally I would glue the end cap on at this point, but for the sake of the video I'm just going to clamp it in place temporarily. Now I'm going to go ahead and return the guide rod assembly into the end vise base and slip those guides through the holes. And here I'm just going to use a little eyeballing to make sure that everything is aligned properly and that the guide rods are indeed centered on the holes that I just bored in the end cap. And with the base pressed firmly against the end cap, I'm going to go ahead and use a self-centering drill bit to bore some initial holes into the 6 or 8, I think it's 8 mounting holes that are used to attach the vise base to the underside of the bench top. These first pilot holes are a little small, so I'm going to enlarge them slightly using a slightly larger drill bit. And basically I'm preparing these holes for some number 14 flathead wood screws that are going to do a good job of firmly attaching that base to the underside of the top. Check the position one more time. Now before I drive these number 14 by 2-inch long screws, I'm going to lubricate them a little bit by rubbing a little candle wax into the threads. This will help them drive easier into the hard maple. And here I'm going to use an impact driver to set these screws. I can use a portable drill or plain old screwdriver just as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and slip the outer vise face onto the guide rods and reinstall the vise screw and end assembly. Before sliding the vise screw all the way into the base, you have to reinstall the two elements of the quick release assembly that make this vise so handy to use. Line those parts and sort of gingerly feed the vise screw through until it's fully seated and the outer plate is engaged in the threaded studs on the end of the guide rods. And now I'll go ahead and replace those nuts and tighten them up. Once the nuts are tight, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the outer vise face, which is still loose, is clamped tightly against the inner one and perfectly aligned with it. Of course, I'm using the vise itself to clamp them together. And now I'm going to use my self-centering drill bit once again to bore the 4 holes for the number 12 by 1 1/4 inch screws that are going to mount the plate to this outer vise face. I enlarge the hole slightly, and once again with my handy-dandy impact driver, I'm going to drive all 4 screws into place. Once that's done, this vise is pretty much ready to use. Mounting the side vise to the bench top is very similar to the process that we just went through. The only difference is that the inner vise face, in this case, is a piece that's going to be attached with 4 countersunk screws to the side edge of the bench top itself. I'm doing that here, just using some nice long number 10 production screws. Before mounting the vise face, of course, I've gone ahead and done the same process of marking and boring the holes for the guide rods and vise screw, in this case using a 7/8 inch Forstner bit. I then mount the side vice's base, just as I did with the end vise base earlier. With the outer vise jaw in place, go ahead and use my number 12 screws to attach it to the end plate assembly. Once the nuts are installed and tightened onto the ends of the guide rods, the vise is ready to go.